Yeah, and it reminds me of one of my favorite books called Thanks for the Feedback. And it talks about there are three major triggers: your identity triggers, your relationship triggers, and truth triggers. That is an onboarding book for my
That's all
practice.
three in that one conversation, right?
There you go. All right. And I think that's the key of why traditional marriage therapy and work doesn't work, because the traditional marriage model that I was trained in is you keep the couple together all the time. You always are focused on the relationship. But I believe the same as you, that once neurodiversity enters the picture, there are two different journeys now. And so now two people have an identity journey. What does this mean about me? What does this mean about us? And so I do say to people, your relationship, there will be little that will change in your relationship until the two of you do your own identity work. It's identity work first, and then we come together to do marriage or couples work, because you do kind of need to be on a similar page. And when couples come in crisis and they're like, we need to start on this now. And it's like, I know you're in crisis, but we can't start right now doing marriage skills and marriage work because we're in crisis and we have to triage and we have to, break these things apart. So I want to switch our conversation to this next question that came in, because when I kind of share my story, a lot of times, not always, the neurotypical person's at a little bit different of a pain point. Because my husband would say, I was fine with how things were working out. I mean, you were a little cranky and moody and emotional, but I'm good. Stephanie was not good. So, but there was a defining moment where I said, I don't know where this relationship is going or how good it's ever going to be, but it is not going to take me down. And I'm going to figure out who I am and survive and thrive, because that's who I need to be. Then we'll work on this relationship thing. But like, I can't be in this space anymore. I lost myself. I lost myself in my mother role to a child on the spectrum. I lost myself in the marriage. I lost myself in my community. I lost myself in my professional roles. Like, will the real Stephanie please stand up? And I started my journey on my identity first. So
we hear you. We hear you.
That's I have a feeling I'm speaking to two people. So let's kind of start there. Because one of the things that you talk about is not being ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's one of the top things. I think it's one of the top 5 things that we hear from people when they come to us either for private coaching or into Loving Difference, is that I don't know who I am anymore. And I think it's important to state that for the vast majority of people, that's an everyone thing. That's not a specific neuroidentity thing. It's not only neurotypical people that are saying that, and it's pretty much everybody, some version of that. And I think even certainly here, even Pete, who thought he was fine to start with, I was very clear already that I wasn't fine. But a few years later, again, his journey was different and different pace to mine. And actually, he started to realize, no, I've not been fine my whole life. But in terms of his measure of fine and what he thought was, the best he could do in life, it was kind of fine. But I think as I began to realize I'm not me and began to learn how to reverse the impact of what we'd not known, and also who I've been my whole life, which was not a particularly healthy relationally person, that started to, me being that version of me, started to give Pete some thoughts or clues. And I just, again, but to the point earlier we were saying about if you just be someone else, do it yourself, it rubs off on people. It has a ripple effect, I think, and was not expected. Heather and I would always say we've only ever got started working on this on our own because our partners weren't interested. We've only then thought that we would find that we could hopefully be all right, and we figured that out. But we were not expecting that it would actually then really have any impact any wider than that, because the myth that we'd been told was that will only happen if you get into therapy together. And the truth of it was that actually us being ourselves, being well, learning how to relate to one another in a healthier way, all of those things started to have an impact on the relationship and on the family. So knowing who you are, I think, is fundamental to all of us. And we've largely gone into the relationship as a version of us that we think we should be, who people have told us we are, what we've sort of been conditioned to think we should be. And I think it means that we're not really being our true selves, you know. And then in the relationship, many of us have started to adapt or accommodate. Again, all neuroidentities could be doing this. It's not to one neurotype or another. That, you know, who you surround yourself with is who you become. So you sort of meld and become a little of each other and bend and all that. And some people are more bendy than others. I was particularly bendy. Much less myself over a period of 15 years. But I also started to notice that Pete was also doing that. Later, I realised that. To start with, I thought I was the only one doing all of that. But actually, what I realised, he'd been masking and camouflaging and not really being himself his whole life. So I really think we're all masking, we're all doing a front, we're all trying to present a version of ourselves. And some of us are needing to do that more than others, to be safe, to be loved, to be accepted and belong. And there's a gift in a journey to discover who you are and begin to live and be that version of yourself. I think it started to make a massive difference for both of us. I think that's, you know, really, really, really key, and speaks to your point, Stephanie, about beginning with that work about who am I, and we think about that in lots of different areas: mentally, spiritually, physically, socially, spiritually, and having opportunity and a process and an approach to be able to do that, to unmask, to be yourself.
Yeah, because we usually talk about masking, you know, specifically in the neurodivergent population, but the neurotypical does that too, a little bit in the dating world too. And so a lot of times the neurotypical spouse will say it was a bait and switch. This person was one way over here. And so maybe it is a little more striking of a difference when a person doesn't know that they're neurodivergent. But also the autistic spouses have said to me, well, Stephanie, they're not exactly the same person they were when we were dating either.
I was not the same person when that at
Definitely
all.
not.
That was one of the things. It was like I felt so much like, well, I was completely not myself, and a completely different person. And so I just lost. It's exactly what you were both talking about too. Just kind of got lost in all the bending and the accommodating and the not knowing what was going on. But these were also, when I started doing the work, patterns that I could pick up that started before the relationship. So it wasn't my partner, it wasn't neurodiversity. These were patterns that we were picking up in any case. It just happened that I ended up in a relationship where I then used the fact that I'd been practicing them all my life to do them really, really, really well. And that had a detrimental effect on me. But it's kind of like some of that was there. The seeds of all of that were there before the relationship even started. So I think when we start talking about, you know, to your listeners' point, is it all about neurodiversity? Well, no, because some of the things that we are doing things too. And some of those things, the history started before. So I think that's a really important point as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And I say this about myself, and then many women I've worked with have said also the neurodiverse relationship, I became the worst version of myself.
Yeah.
And so that goes back to, let's find that person you were like before the relationship.
I became the worst wife, the wife that I never wanted to be, the nagger, I became the mother I never thought I would be, shouting. You know, that wasn't ever on my agenda. I started off managing very well and being quite superwoman about the whole thing. Yeah, I can rock 4 children and sort out everything else and do everything and fix everything and, you know, never ask for any help and all of these things. But yes, that turned me into a person that I really did not like.
And I think that's definitely one of the impacts of unknown neurodiversity in a relationship, where we are so that's why we often phrase it like that. It's the unknown neurodiversity that has created the impact. It's not neurodiversity itself that has created the impact. It's not knowing that you're different. It's not knowing that you're having a different experience. It's not knowing that you're seeing a situation differently or experiencing it differently. That's what creates the confusion or the mismatch and the misunderstandings. And it's that you haven't known that. So I think, the impact of that for most people, certainly many people, is a deterioration gradually, depending how long you've been together, but it can start quite fast, of your well-being in all areas of your well-being. Like, it starts to deteriorate because there is a persistent stress going on in the relationship because of not knowing how different you are and not having ways to deal with that, and it triggering your fears and vulnerabilities and patterns and ways that you relate and do life and love with other people when you don't know that that's what you're navigating. So I think with the knowledge of it, whether or not your partner's up for knowing that or working on it, what we can work on is our well-being and restoring that, because that gives us the capacity and starts to support us to be a better version of us. It's often that as our well-being deteriorates, our experience of resentment, anger, frustration, disappointment, all of these all go up. So there's some things we can do to begin to address that, and then have some healthier ways to handle those big feelings that we've been having, all that hurt, lots and lots of hurt, thousands and thousands of situations that have not gone how we thought they should. And that's a lot of hurt to heal and to look after and make sense of.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I really love when I get young couples who are already starting with they're engaged or pre-engaged, like, hey, we know we're neurodiverse and we want to take a different approach to how we do our relationship together. There's a whole different beginning there than decades of internalization. What's wrong with me? Why is this person rejecting me? Why did he or she say that? And in some research that I did, I had 300 people in the general population. Then I pulled aside 20 couples. I actually found one thing similar between neurodivergent women and neurotypical women. And that was 18 of the 21 women I talked to in the neurodiverse relationship, whether they were neurodivergent or neurotypical, had autoimmune issues. From chronic stress. Again, the unknown, undiagnosed. So did one of y'all kind of have some chronic health issues due to the stress of the unknown neurodiversity?
Across all the areas, deterioration in all the areas. And I think there is a gender difference sometimes to that. Men will go a different route. So it's quite well known, I think, that in very stressful, persistent stress situations, women tend towards autoimmune illness. And for men, it's more they shut themselves off, they're lonely, and it might, goes to a different kind of a place, or they're much more anxious, and it's, it isn't, or they're doing a lot more work and driven to just be working. And so there's definitely some gender differences there, I think. But it's helpful to just to know that this is where persistent stress can lead us, and the sooner we again can make changes to that, and you can do that yourself, the better. Without leaving your relationship as well. That's the other thing. I think there's a lot of places, I think, that we certainly found it was, well, you can only recover, you can only get well again if you leave, if you're not in the relationship. And if you're in it, then it's us kind of just have to kind of survive it and just do some self-care. And I think we sort of tried that, and we're like, there's got to be something better than this. We were just really depressed by that whole narrative. And I think it was really important for us to find a different way forward than that, because we had young children who were also struggling. We had financially, we weren't in positions to do, like, that wasn't an option really. So we thought, well, we have to figure something else out, and we did, and actually realized there are ways to do it, even when life and that stress is carrying on. It might be faster or easier. And obviously, because you take yourself out of the situation if you leave the relationship, and clearly that is a quicker way to recover, but that's because you're not in the environment that is stressful and triggering. But you absolutely can recover with the right support, with the right ways, inside of it as well. That's like we were
It's
surprised.
what
I
we
think we
needed to
surprised
do, isn't
ourselves
it?
about that.
And and that's what you've done as well, Stephanie, isn't it? So,
Yes.
you know, we are living proof that that is entirely possible. And
Yes.
part of that journey is addressing all of the other things as well that are going on. And so we also talk about in Love Indifference, we help people sort of to look at their sort of like relationship dynamics and how healthy they are, how unhealthy they are. And many, you know, people come to us and they're wanting to sort out communication. Oh, communication's rubbish. We're just going to sort that out. Have you got some strategies or whatever? And the problem is it's such a small part, the words, and, you know, you can have a framework, you can have some scripts or whatever, but it's not as effective if you don't get the underlying things right, and the communication ways and all of the, we really need to kind of cut down on the reactivity that's going on. So we need to start doing some of the really important work underneath. We talk about the foundations, or what's really underneath all of that. What's the reactivity that's going on? So we talked a little bit more about just now about the autoimmune disease. Well, that's been very much linked to women whose gender difference or social conditioning perhaps has meant that instead of getting angry or running away or doing one of the other kind of 5 F's of the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop, we've tended to do the fawn. So we've tended to go into people pleasing, we're tending to appease, we're tending to fix things, we're tending to sort things out, we're tending to I'll do that, and don't want to impose on anybody, so I'm not going to ask for help. So that, I think, tends to be, and I know there's been a lot of research now on how people with autoimmune disease tend to be the helpers. They are the people who go out of their way to help other people, but without necessarily helping themselves or looking after themselves. So figuring out some of that reactivity. I mean, one of the things I think was interesting in the journey, because I became very fascinated by all the things about the nervous system. That was my in to figuring out all of what was going on for me. And I think sometimes our descriptions of those kind of 5 defensive states aren't particularly nuanced enough for us to recognize ourselves. So I would say, oh, I'm not someone who does fight. I don't get into arguments. I don't do rowing. No, because I just stuff it down and go into resentment and simmer and do some passive aggressive kind of like snidey comments. But, you know, no, I'm fine. I'm not defensive at all, you know, and so I think it becomes really helpful if we start getting much more nuanced about what actually is going on in our body. What do I start thinking? How do I start behaving when I'm in these, what we call red states? And what can I actually do to shift myself more into green? And what happens when I'm there? Oh, I think quite differently. And when I'm there, I kind of, everything seems a bit different. I'm not so bothered about those things. And one of the things that amazes me is actually how little, in some ways, how little things have changed, but how my experience of them has changed phenomenally. I mean, to the point where something that I would probably, if I'm entirely honest, want to, you know, go absolutely bonkers at something, is something that we'll have a good giggle about now. You know, it's funny. It's something we connect about. It's something we, I don't recognize about ourselves, and we're not defensive about it anymore. We're just quite open and honest with each other about some of our traits that are just peculiar to each other. I mean, and the other thing was to really notice that some of the things that Natalie talked about it, to equivalence before. So one of the things we can say is like, oh, we're very good at pointing out what other people are doing wrong, or that's annoying, or isn't meeting our needs, or whatever. But we very rarely actually flip that over and go, oh, I wonder how I'm meeting their needs, or I wonder how I'm, you know, I'm wondering. And, you know, we talk a lot about likes, preferences and tolerances and limits. And and how much do we actually think about each other's of those? So that kind of reactivity and that sort of defense mode, trying to get out of that kind of patterns for us. So we're really talking about things that started a long time ago, but have really come out in the state of persistent stress. I think the other thing, like in those dynamics, and Natalie already mentioned as well about social conditioning, were just as we got told who we are, and we had all these stories about who we are as women or men or as people growing up in working class, whatever it was, we had all of that. But we've also got a load of stories around what a relationship should be.
Yeah.
You know, I'm still looking for Gilbert from Anne of Green Gables. I don't know about anyone else. I mean, Disney, I mean, what have they done to us in terms of our expectations of what a relationship should look like? We can get lots of different stories modeled to us from our family, what we experienced as children. You know, faith as well can have a big impact in this area, forming our values around relationships. And so we help our members kind of unpick some of this social conditioning, understand where some of those expectations might have come from, and bring in things like acceptance and letting go of some of that. So it's kind of like it's big work, but it really shifts the rewards are really big too. So I think the other one in there as well, I had no boundaries, so absolutely no boundaries. So we talk a lot about boundaries, and boundaries, as I thought was something that I just made a rule. That was like my boundaries, like my children have to go to bed on time. You know, I didn't really understand what a boundary was, and I certainly didn't really have any. So we do talk a lot about healthy relationship boundaries, you know, how particularly for me, how I could stop trying to fix everything and rescue everything, and how I can start to have more trust. But for others, it could be that they really are very walled up, and they're just not, you know, their defense, they've not been safe for all their lives. So they've kind of built walls. So walls keep people out, doors let everyone in. So is your door too open? Is your wall too high? So we look at all of those kind of things, and then a lot about trust and safety. And I could talk a really long time about that, and I'm conscious of the time. So
Yes.
but all of that, you know, all of that work is so important. So I think how much we trust others, how much we trust ourselves, you know, these things are, and even just thinking about it, I mean, how we don't really tend to have these kind of conscious thoughts. So much of our lives and so much of our relationship are on autopilot. We're just reacting, and then someone is reacting from our reacting, and we're reacting from that reacting, and it's
Call
all
it trigger
all
dominoes.
yeah,
Sure.
trigger dominoes. So how can we catch the trigger, pause, create some steadiness, not to stuff it down or ignore the reaction emotion we've had, but how can we go and do that somewhere else, process that in a really healthy way, and come back and then have a conversation about it? I mean, these things, this is what we're kind of aiming for, that we kind of interrupt that pattern of for those who are listening, I was just doing a stacking kind of emotion where everything just kind of starts, you know, you get this build up, and then someone just like does a huge like pop at the top of it, because we aren't able to stay steady in an emotional experience either that we're having, or certainly not steady in an emotional experience that somebody else is having. So these are all things that we definitely promise you we have tools and ways and step-by-step guidance to help people work through some of these things, so that when they do attempt to go back and put the relationship back together, they're doing it from a place of much more steadiness, much less reactivity, much more understanding of their old emotional patterns and hurts and vulnerabilities and fears, so they're not getting triggered all the time. And even if the other person hasn't, and as Natalie alluded to, sometimes there's been a ripple effect. So they are now feeling more safe anyway, because we're not kicking off all the time or reacting or doing whatever it is we keep doing. We're being more accepting. So suddenly everything is shifting around, and just by one person changing, the whole family system can be completely different. And so I mean, that's just one of the things that we're really passionate about, and we love to help people to unpick all of that. So
Certainly much more going on than which neurotype or just not it's not all about the differences. I think that's the thing. It's not all about, I think all of this other stuff that we can do something about, I think makes the differences much easier to navigate. Ultimately, it's not that we've now resolved and we're not different. We still have the differences, different needs, different tolerances, different preferences, all kinds of differences, but we have some healthier ways to navigate those, to, you know, ourselves and together, which just sets the relationship up in a much healthier and better way, I think. Yeah.